Hi guys, this is Nathan from Codeuix. This video is all about Sas. Let us look at the concepts that we will be covering in this tutorial. First and foremost, what is Sas? How to use Sas for styling our HTML pages. Different syntaxes supported by Sas. And explore some Sas concepts like variables, nesting, modules, mixins, placeholders, inheritance, and operators. Finally, we'll look at some pro tips on how to write modular CSS using Sass. Without further ado, let's get started. So let's start with the question, what is Sass? Sass is a CSS precompiler where the code written in Sass is compiled to CSS, or it can also be defined as follows. Sass is a scripting language which compiles our Sass code to CSS. So in this image, you can visualize that the SCSS file or the Sass file is sent to the compiler, and compiler is responsible for compiling the Sass file to CSS file, which will be used for styling our HTML pages. Now let's look at the different syntaxes supported by Sass. So basically, the Sass older version is called as Indentation Syntax, where indentation is used in a code of block for every new line. So in the example, you can see that our style attributes are indented towards the right, and there is no semicolon to end our styling attributes. And one of the most widely used Sass syntax is called SCSS, where a block of code is enclosed between flower braces, and you can see that the syntax is almost similar to CSS. Even the style attributes ends with an semicolon. Now let me open my Visual Studio Code and go to my extensions and type in Sass compiler, and here we have a live Sass compiler extension. We can install this particular live Sass compiler, which actually compiles our SCSS code to CSS. And once you install this, you may need to reload your Visual Studio Code. As I've already installed it, I would not be reloading it. So let me go to my files. So and yeah, I've already like created an index.html file. So I'll just give you an quick run through of all the elements available here. So here I have an header element where our my navigation links are placed. So I have home, about, and contact, and I have a container where my blog post is placed. So in my blog, I have a blog featured image, and my my blog content is like it has a category button, and it has a title, description, and there is also an author image with author name and published date. And here I also have a folder of images, as I've already linked some of them. So now let me create an folder called style, so where we'll be writing our Sass files. So here I'll create a file named as main.scss. So here I will reset all the browser default stylings available using the following code, and I'll also add some styling for my HTML document. So here I've added a style attribute saying that my font family would be Lato and my background color would dark gray and my color would be white. So now let's go and click on this watch Sass icon that was created when we installed our Sass compiler extension. When I click on this, it'll compile my Sass code to CSS, and here you can see that my CSS compiled CSS that's been returned, and here you can see the vendor prefix was added by default by the Sass compiler extension that we installed. So now let me go to my index.html file and link that particular CSS file. So let me save this and let me open my development server. So you can see that it has removed all the default browser styles, and it has added the background color and the font color as white. And now we have seen how you can utilize Sass for styling our HTML pages. So let's dive into the Sass features that are available. So we'll be looking at partials and modules feature that is available by CSS. So what we can do here is we can create a partial CSS file that contains little snippets of CSS code that can be used in any of the other Sass file. So this is a great way to modularize our CSS and help it'll help us keep things clean and easier to maintain. So for creating a partial Sass file, the file should start with an underscore and file name. So here I'll create an partial file called base.scss, and here my default uh, code to reset my browser stylings. I will move it to my base partial 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 Sass file, and here I can include my partials by calling a rule called at import and the name of the partial. So it'll be base. So now once I click on this, my Sass was compiled, and if I go to my main.css file, you can see that still it's working. The second Sass features that we'll be looking at is variable. You can think variables as a way to store information that you want to use throughout your style sheet. So you can store things like colors, fonts, or any CSS value that you want to reuse in your entire site. So you need to use dollar symbol to define the variable in Sass. Here I'll create a folder, guys, for maintaining all my partials. So all the features will be included as an partial. So I'll create an folder called base, and I'll move this particular base.css partial which we had created. Let me rename it to partials, and here we'll also import it as base slash partials and save it. Now, now let's create another partials for including all our variables. So the name of the partial would be underscore variables dot scss. So as I said, the variables will start with a dollar sign. Here I'll be creating variables to store the values of the color. So let me save this variable folder, and I will go to my main.scss file, and I will use the rule import rule to get the partial variable partial, which is base and variables. So and here what I can do is instead of hard coding my font and colors, I can call the variables like this. Your font, here it would be primary color, and I've saved it. And if I go to my main.css, you can see that although we have used our variables here, if you want to change the color of the if you want to change the primary color, you can just change it here, like let's say it's black instead of dark gray, and save it. And if we open our main.css, you can see that our background is changed. So if we have used this particular variable like in n number of block codes, so it'll be added to all the codes. You don't need to manually go and add it. So this is one of the advantage of using variables. The next feature that is available in Sass, which is nesting. So you may have seen nesting. So if I open my HTML page, you can see the visual hierarchy available here. You can see that my anchor tag is within navigation and navigation is within my header. But we don't use the same type of hierarchy for our CSS file. So what Sass provides is it provides a way for creating and use nesting for like adding style. Let me showcase an example. So here you can see there is an hierarchy that we are using. So our header contains a styling, and under header we have a navigation. Under navigation we have stylings for our a tag. And here the beauty of having nesting is we can also add nesting for our pseudo elements. Like I'll show you how to add pseudo element. We need to use our ampersand symbol followed by the pseudo element. So here I'll be adding it for hover. So when I hover on my anchor tag, I want to change the background color. So I can save this. So my CSS like Sass file is compiled. Now let me go to my CSS file. You can see although I had created a nesting, so it has like created a separate block of styling code for each. For our hover, which is our pseudo element, we had created and header navigation a tag. Now let's look at another feature that is available in Sass, which is Mixins. So let me create another partial called as Mixins. So we'll look at what Mixin exactly is. So sometimes in CSS it's tedious to write repetitive codes, create and mixins to handle this particular types of task. So I'll create a basic task where I I will be sending an argument for my mixin stating the radius. So for using mixins, we need to use a rule called at mixin, and here we can give the name of the mixin. So I'll be using so I've created an mixin to handle my border radius. So let me go to my main.scss file, and here let me add some stylings for my card element. So here I can like include my mixins using the rule include and call my mixin by name. So that would be, so it's rounded border, right? Let me just copy paste that. It's rounded border, and in my argument I can specify the value that needs to be sent. So if it is 10 pixels, I can see like this, close this and save it. So I got an error because we have not imported our partials. So let me quickly import my partials, my mixin partial, import b slash mixins. And if I save, yeah, my Sass was converted to CSS. And if I go down here, you can see that my code was replaced, like it was added here. So here mixins can be used with variables inside partials, and as well as nesting inside nesting. So there's no limitations of for mixins. So and our next feature that we'll be looking at is placeholders and inheritance. So you may think, what is placeholders? Most of the time what we do is like multiple class selectors or the elements share a common set of style attributes. For creating those type of shared resources, let me create an partial called placeholders. So here I'll create an placeholder for like my images. For images, there are some attributes that are default, like display block, and the width of the image would be 100%, except width would be 100%, height would be auto. So this particular set of style attributes will be shared among all the images. So for creating an placeholder or an inheritance, we'll use an role percentage. Then we'll be giving a name for the placeholder, which is image. Then here we'll be specifying all our styling attributes, like display block with 100%. So and here we'll also be using margin, like double minimum margin. Height should be auto. And this particular placeholder we'll be importing it in our main.scss file. Let me close this and save this. And let me go to my index.html file and get the classes for that. So I have a class card image, and there is card image. Let me change the class name for now. It's card image 1. So if I go to my main.css file and use this placeholder for the classes, so it was card. So here we will be using an rule called extend, and call our placeholder by name, which is image, and we can specify the max, and we can write other styling attributes as well. Here I'll be writing some styling attributes, which would be my max width, and I will copy the same thing and add it to my other class. So and here I'll be changing the max width to 80 pixels. And once I save this, so my Sas got compiled. Let me go to my main.css and look at a style attribute, card image and card image. You can see that the max width has a different selector and my card image one has a different selector. But the shared attributes, shared styling attributes, you can see that display, block, and everything is assigned for both the selectors. So now let's look at our final Sas feature, which is operators. So as the name says that in CSS, doing math is very helpful, but CSS doesn't allow using math without calc function. So in SAS, we can use a standard math operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and modulus. So here we'll see some of the examples. So here I have multiplying the number 0.95 into 100%, and I'll save it, and you can see that my container will be having an width of 95%. And here there is an another feature that's actually hidden. So what we can do is, let me go to my Mixin file, and here we can create functions actually. So for creating functions, we'll use a rule called function and calculate width. And here we'll be giving an augment of column, and this will use a rule called return, and here we'll be returning the value instead of like the style attribute, like how we were using it for Mixin. We are like sending out the style attribute like border radius and whatever the value that's been given. If it is 10 pixels, 10 pixels, that will be just copy paste it. But in our functions, we'll be only returning the value. So we'll be doing the operations like 100% divided by whatever column span they want to look at. So let me save this. And if I go to my placeholder, like sorry, my main.scss file, instead of like writing my operators here, I can call the function like calculate width, and here I can see. So I want 50% of this thing. So here I'll be sending calculate width of 2. And once I save this, and if I go to my main.css file, you can see that I got my width as 50%. So it's all up to you guys how you would be using this particular features that are available. So let me like use this particular feature which I've used. So wherever I've used my width, so here instead of hard coding it as 33%, I can see like my this thing will be divided into 4 elements. Guys, I've also added some stylings. I'll just showcase you some. So here I've added a calculate width calculation, like ascending at 1.1, which will give me like 90% width. And I've also added an mixin named as add padding. So here add padding takes in value and it will return an styling attribute appended, like a value appended to the padding style attribute. Let me go to my main.css file, And here I've added, like, if you see this card category, right, you can see that this is our mixin to like add border. This is our mixin to add padding, and this is we are using variable here to like assign the color, and this is where we are like using, like, there is an endless opportunity like to create use this features where you can write all the particular functions or the mixins that you'll be reusing in different class selectors. For me, writing Sass is better than writing CSS file. Now we have seen all the features, namely how to use variables, how to use mixins, what are partials or modules, and how placeholders are important, and nesting. Now we'll be looking at some pro tips on how to write a modular CSS using Sass. Let us look at how to get most of Sass using these pro tips. So my first tip would be structuring your project. So that's one thing that you need to like spend most of your time figuring out how to structure your files. So here, as you can see that my base folder contains some partials, placeholders, variables. You can also follow this type of structuring, or you can create modules like, let's say, components, and create a partials for each component. Like, let's say if you're using, so I was using card, so I can use card.scss and card.scss partial and write all my s- uh, component related stylings here, and then import it somewhere else. So this is one way of like always try your best to like spend some time before starting any project with Sass, like arranging your folder structure. And my second pro tip would be like using Sass variable more efficiently. So what I mean is, so if you go to your variables, right, so this particular variables give you a sense that saying this is a primary color that would be used. The naming of the variable is most important, because for any developers that would be looking into your Sass file needs to know what exactly this variable is all about. Don't say that bg color and give some particular color like 222. Rather than try using variables that give a meaning like variable black, so assign a like the color for it, and then use this color instead of directly assigning an exact code. You can use this type of variable to variable assignment. And also you need to look at using a naming convention for your HTML and CSS. So if I go to my HTML file, you can see that I'm using BEM. So BEM is abbreviated as the block element modifier methodology. It is a popular naming convention for classes in HTML and CSS. It helps developers to better understand the relationship between the HTML and CSS in a given project. So for a block, we'll be giving it as a direct name like card, and for element, we'll be using underscore, and this element means that it is an anchor tag, so we'll be specifying that this is a link. And similarly, this is for image. And for elements that would be changing some major stuff, we'll be using something like this, which is hyphen for elements. So try as much as possible to use BEM for your HTML and CSS naming convention, and ensure that all the variables that you are using is justified. Don't simply add unnecessary variables like border 5 pixels, because this doesn't make sense. And my next pointer would be using mixins efficiently. So what do I mean by this is like if I go to my Mixins, right? Here you can see an example of how efficient this is. Like an arc can we can give multiple values like let's say it's 10 pixels or we can be like extending it for like defining the top value, top, left, right, and bottom values like 10 pixels, 5 pixels, 10 pixels, 5 pixels like that. So this is an efficient way of writing mixins. And don't write mixins like this, guys, because what happens is whenever you use this mixins, there is a lot of repetition of the code creates that would create a mass of duplicate codes and can blot your CSS files if not used correctly. Next pro tip would be like use placeholders or inheritance as much as possible. Unlike mixins, placeholders can be used multiple times without adding any duplicate code. This makes them much friendlier options for outputting dry CSS. The repeated code in the placeholder is output only once with only unique styles being applied to the individual selectors. If unused, the placeholder styles are not outputted at all. And my next pro tip would be like try using functions as much as possible. So why use functions is for all types of calculations. As we had used calculations in here, you can see that this is a simpler way of calculating the width or like any other stuff. So always try to use functions to perform calculation. Don't simply like add the operators in your style sheet. So that will not make sense for any other developers who would be looking at the code. So always try using functions. My next pro tip would be like always order your work. So what I mean by ordering your work is, as you can see that always the font family should come first, then we'll be adding background. So this will was ordering the way the styling will be applied. So you'll be adding the font first, then we will be adding the background, then the color of the font, etc. Always follow the order of how you want stylings to be applied. And my final pro tip was be careful of using nesting. So why I say that you need to be careful of nesting is, as you can see that we have nested like three levels. So there are some tips like you shouldn't nest more than three levels deep, like navigation anchor. Then we have over, which is an pseudo selector. So why you shouldn't do this like more than three level depth is it will affect, it'll over specify your CSS styling. So it'll be like tedious task to know why this specific style is not getting applied to a particular selector if you over use this nesting. So and next thing is it'll ensure that you'll be getting a clean and reusable CSS as an output. And nesting, use nesting only once when it makes sense. Like here in my header, it add in sense of like navigation and anchor, but don't use it as a default option. Use only one that's necessary. That's it, guys, for this video. Until next time, see you. Bye bye, and thanks, guys.